I had kept that secret for 3 years. When dawn breaks over San Francisco, the city's skyline blushes in soft apricot light, and I stand on the narrow balcony of our 42nd floor penthouse, clutching a chipped ceramic mug of black coffee as if it were a lifeline. Below me, cable cars trundle along their winding tracks, the foghorns echo faintly from the bay, and the occasional horn blare reminds me I'm still tethered to the pulse of a harbor city that never truly sleeps. But up here, above the glass and steel, I am suspended in an uneasy calm, just me, my breathing, and the weight of my own thoughts. This panorama was supposed to be the promise of a new beginning, the kind of view that makes you believe you can conquer the world. I remember the first time I saw it, at the closing of our real estate deal. I was breathless, heart pulsing, certain that this stylish loft with floor-to-ceiling windows would transform my life. But dreams become dust when the people you hoped would share them treat you like you're invisible. I turn the mug in my hands, swirling the dark liquid into a spiral. Steam ghosts up and disappears. For 3 years, since the day I signed that prenup, I've lived between these walls with a halo of glass around me and with a debt so massive it could drown a small family. $70,000 in student loans, another $25,000 spent on my first design prototype that never sold. Rent chewed up my credit score, and credit cards pinched every last cent in overdraft fees. All of it piled up like jagged stones in my chest. And yet the only person who never asked me about that debt, who never asked if I was okay, was the one person I thought would care the most, the one I married. I lean against the steel railing, letting the morning breeze lift stray strands of my hair. There's a silence up here that feels unnatural, as if the universe hit pause on everything that matters. The concrete below hums with life. Early morning joggers, dog walkers with cheerful beagles, delivery trucks rumbling through Chinatown. But up here, the only soundtrack is my own heart. I take a slow sip, bitter and grounding. Coffee is the only warmth I allow myself before the day begins, before I slip into my tailored blouse, before I walk the corridor to my husband's office, where I'm chief design officer on paper and little more than a ghost in practice. The truth is, I don't even know why he married me. Ethan Cole, co-founder and CEO of Helix Health AI, is as brilliant as he is handsome, sharp cheekbones, dark hair streaked with premature silver, eyes that miss even the smallest detail in a code review. When we met at that Stanford hackathon 3 years ago, his team had hit a roadblock on their interface, and my prototype earned us first place. He smiled at me then, that crisp, disarming grin that felt like sunshine, before he saw the numbers in my bank account and the lines on my credit report. Somewhere along the line, gratitude turned into an arrangement. My debt for an image of stability, his startup for my credentials, a partnership, they called it. But I never felt partnered, not once. I rubbed my temples, fighting the dull ache of another sleepless night. I promised myself I wouldn't drown in resentment, yet every moment feels like a tide pulling me under. The penthouse feels less like home and more like a gilded cage, a daily reminder of what I traded for survival. I glance down at my phone, checking for messages from my sister, from friends, anything. Silence. Until a new alert lights up the screen. Ethan Cole. Tomorrow night we're taking the stage together. My pulse quickens. I reread the text, trying to parse any hidden meaning in those few words. The gallery opening at the Embarcadero? The investor gala for Series B? Life in Helix Health means every public appearance is choreographed months in advance. He could have sent this a week ago, or even an hour ago. Why now? That question reverberates louder than any applause I've ever heard. My fingers hover above the keyboard, thumb poised to reply something caustic like, "Glad I didn't make the cut all these years." But I stop. I close my eyes, inhale the salty breeze, and let my defenses soften for a moment. Because deep down, I still care. I still wonder if he sees me at all. The coffee mug is empty now, though its warmth lingers in my palms. I set it on the balcony floor, listening to the gentle thud on the concrete. For a split second, I allow myself to hope that maybe tomorrow night everything will be different. Maybe he's finally ready to share the spotlight. I pull my phone back, tapping out a brief response. "Understood. See you at 6. I hit send and let out a quiet sigh that tastes of both dread and expectation. The sky above shimmers golden, as if urging me to believe that change is possible, even for a woman who's felt invisible for far too long. Tomorrow night, we'll stand together. And whatever happens on that stage, I know I'll never be the same again. I remember the morning I first felt my world tilt. I woke to a terse email from the university's bursar's office. "Your student account is past due. Immediate action required." My heart sank as I scanned the figures. $70,000 in loans, plus penalties that climbed by the day. I dropped to my knees beside my dorm-style futon, hands trembling. Rent was due next week. If I couldn't cover both tuition and housing, I would lose my room. I paced our shared apartment's tiny kitchen, staring at an eviction notice tacked to the refrigerator. My roommate, a graduate student in philosophy, had already packed her boxes, heading home for the summer. I overheard her on a phone call, promising her parents she'd stay with them for a while. No such option existed for me. My parents lived 2 states away, barely scraping by themselves. I was on my own. In that moment, desperation sharpened my focus. I scoured listings for freelance design gigs, editing logos, tweaking web buttons, anything to bring in a few $100s. Each rejection email stung like salt in an open wound. My savings account teetered at 3 digits. I spent nights drafting cover letters and days teaching myself advanced prototyping techniques. Still, the debt loomed larger than any pay stub I could earn. Then came the hackathon announcement. AI for Good, hosted by Stanford. A 24-hour sprint where teams would build meaningful prototypes, judged by investors and professors. The prize? A small cash award, plus mentorship opportunities. I knew this was my only shot to break the cycle. I registered, drafted a basic concept, an interface that used emotion recognition to help users manage stress, and crammed 10 years of design experience into a weekend. Saturday morning, I pushed through the sliding doors of Stanford's Y2E incubator. The air crackled with caffeine and ambition. Teams huddled around laptops, sketching diagrams on whiteboards, arguing syntax in hushed tones. I found an empty table and unpacked my laptop, heart pounding. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I outlined the user flow. A calming color palette, intuitive swipe gestures for tracking mood, subtle vibrations when the user's stress level peaked. That's when I heard him. "Excuse me, are you Lily Parker?" I looked up into the face of Ethan Cole, tall, confident, with an easy smile that didn't reach his dark, calculating eyes. I recognized him from the startup scene. His company was pioneering AI-driven telemedicine interfaces. I nodded, blinking at him. "Your mock-up, the way you've designed the dashboard, is exactly what we need to humanize our app." He took the empty seat beside me. Mind if I take a closer look? He leaned forward, fingers tracing the outlines of my prototype on screen. I felt a curious warmth spread through my chest. For the first time in months, someone saw my work, not my debt. He asked questions that showed he understood design principles, not just code. He listened as I explained each color choice and icon position. The hackathon blurred into a whirlwind of code commits and pizza boxes. By midnight, our small team me on UX, Ethan's coders on backend, had a working demo. The judges arrived, skeptical at first, then impressed as we walked them through a user scenario. A stressed student receiving a gentle prompt to take a breathing break, followed by a soothing soundscape. When we finished, the room broke into applause. When they announced first place, Ethan's hand found mine. His grip was firm, celebratory. I remember how my pulse raced, not from fatigue, but from something else, possibility. In that moment, I thought maybe I'd found a kindred spirit, someone who appreciated more than just my ability to clear a balance sheet. He looked at me and said, "We make a good team." A week later, I met him at a downtown coffee shop. He offered me a part-time contract role at his fledgling startup, Helix Health AI. My mind raced with relief rent paid, loan obligations eased, future unfolding. I didn't hesitate. In exchange, he wanted my name on the project, a formal title, Chief Experience Officer. I accepted, but what felt like a partnership soon morphed into something more transactional. I realized, months later, that he valued my credentials more than my presence. My office on the 12th floor was an empty cubicle with my nameplate gathering dust. I attended board meetings, but my suggestions rarely translated into action. I was the designer, on paper, but invisible in practice. And then came the day he slid a prenup across the conference table. The words student debt forgiveness and public image enhancement were inked in legalese. I signed because I had no choice. I traded my name, my dreams for a chance to survive. But to understand why I say we were married, take a look at that contract. I walked into the attorney's suite on Market Street with a knot of dread coiling in my stomach. The walls were paneled in walnut, and law books lined the shelves like silent sentinels. A single recessed light hovered above the long mahogany table, illuminating a neat stack of papers and 2 pens, one silver, one black, waiting to be claimed. I felt the chill of the morning air linger on my shoulders as I sat down and smoothed the front of my blazer, though the fabric did nothing to calm my racing heart. Across from me sat Mr. Gaines, a senior partner at Cranston & Reed. His expression was all business, pinched lips, watchful gray eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses, and a tie knotted with perfect precision. Next to him stood his junior associate, Ms. Herrera, who flipped through the pages with clinical efficiency. Neither offered me a warm greeting. This was not the place for pleasantries. On my right was the empty chair reserved for Ethan. He hadn't arrived yet. My pen hovered above the first page, which bore the contract title in bold, Marital Agreement and Confidentiality Clause. My breath trembled as I ran my finger down the first paragraph, which outlined the basic trade. In exchange for complete forgiveness of my outstanding student loans and a lump sum payment to cover my living expenses, I would grant Ethan full rights to present me as his equal in media appearances, to list my design title in corporate filings, and to maintain the appearance of a stable marriage for prospective investors. I forced my eyes upward just as Ethan slid into the seat next to me. He looked as immaculate as ever. Tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, dark brown Oxford shoes polished to a mirror sheen. He offered me a brief nod, but his eyes were cool, detached, professional. It felt like being offered a hand in a chess game that neither side intended to win. Mr. Gaines cleared his throat. "Ms. Parker, Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. We'll begin with a quick review of the material terms." His voice had the authority of a judge reading a verdict. I tried to focus on each clause, but my mind flared at the phrase, "complete discharge of financial obligation," followed by public relations provisions. My signature would wipe away $70,000 in loans, plus interest that had ballooned over the years. At the same time, it would lock me into a facade one that granted me visibility in name only. My role as Chief Experience Officer would exist on annual reports, but only when it suited Helix Health's narrative. Ms. Herrera recited the details in a monotone. Section 4.1. Mr. Cole shall direct the university to release Ms. Parker from all outstanding tuition and fees. Section 4.2. Ms. Parker shall provide up to 12 public engagements per year under terms determined by Mr. Cole's Corporate Communications Office. Section 5.1. In the event of dissolution within 5 years, Ms. Parker shall relinquish any claim to stock options earned during that period and refund any prior disbursements. My pulse pounded in my ears. 12 appearances. 5-year commitment. For a moment, I imagined myself trapped inside each event, smiling for cameras, delivering rote thank yous, silently counting the days until I could be free, or until the 5 years ticked by. When they paused, Mr. Gaines slid the papers toward me, the leaves rustling like distant wings. "If you're both ready, you may sign." Ethan took the silver pen without hesitation. I watched his wrist flick as he pressed ink to paper, the fluid scrawl of his name crisp and unhesitating. He glanced at me, an almost polite acknowledgement, before shifting his gaze to the wall, where a framed poster displayed Helix Health's accolades. My attention flicked to the digital screen embedded at the edge of the table, showing an animated slideshow of Lily Parker's design portfolio, prototypes for VR therapy modules, a mood-tracking app interface, a visually appealing dashboard that had once been a beacon of my creativity. Ethan paused mid-signature, leaning forward to study one of the slides more intently than necessary. I caught the corner of his mouth twitch. Was it admiration? Or calculation? He tapped the screen, magnifying a graph that tracked user engagement metrics. For a fraction of a second, his eyes softened, and I thought I detected genuine respect for the work I'd poured my heart into. Then he closed the folded corner of the page and returned to the contract, as if reminding himself which transaction truly mattered. When it was my turn, the black pen felt heavier than any stylus I'd ever used. I inhaled and pressed ink to paper, signing my name just below his. The scratch of the pen was deafening in the hush of the room. My signature sealed every promise and every limitation, debt wiped away, visibility in name only, a marriage arranged for optics. I slid the contract across the table without looking up. Mr. Gaines gathered the signed pages, tucking them into a folder with a crisp snap. "Excellent. We'll file these with the court clerk by end of day." He offered no congratulations. Ethan stood, straightening his lapels. He looked at me once more, his expression inscrutable. "Thank you, Lily," he said, voice polite but distant. Then he walked out without waiting for further instruction. I remained seated, hands curled around the empty pen, trying to steady my racing heart. 3 years of security had been bought at the cost of my autonomy. I forced myself to stand and follow, stepping into the hallway's fluorescent glare, Before the door closed behind me, I thought I heard a flicker of something in Ethan's stride, perhaps pride, perhaps regret, but I couldn't be sure. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my skirt, and whispered to myself, "To understand why I say we were married, take a look at that contract." As the heavy oak door clicked shut, I knew that the rest of my life awaited on the other side, in a wedding gown, and in a world where I would have to learn how to be seen again. The ceremony was over almost before it began. In the small chapel on Pacific Avenue, we said our vows in a hurried exchange so brief that I barely registered the sound of my own voice. The officiant, an older family friend of Ethan's, flipped through a slender booklet, glanced at us once, and pronounced us husband and wife. "You may now kiss the bride," he said, but neither of us moved. Warm amber light filtered through stained glass windows, painting the rows of empty white chairs in muted jewel tones. A handful of guests, Ethan's investors, a cousin or two, and my roommate's mother, applauded politely as we stepped down the narrow aisle. Their smiles felt distant, like polite waves from another world. I clutched the bouquet of white lilies I'd barely glanced at during the reading, petals soft against my palm, their fragrance faint but persistent. Outside the chapel, the courtyard reception was set up under strings of Edison bulbs. Brass lanterns glowed on the weathered brick walls. A few small tables and ivory linens held trays of hors d'oeuvres, smoked salmon canapes, mini quiches, and delicate chocolate-dipped strawberries. A single guitarist strummed John Legend's All of Me on a corner stage, the melody floating into the night air. Ethan guided me to a table near the entrance, where two chairs sat angled toward each other. We stood in front of them, ring boxes unopened in our hands. His suit jacket brushed mine, and I felt the warmth of his body, but heard nothing, no invitation to speak, no congratulations. The guests milled around, sipping champagne, congratulating each other, but we remained in our own bubble of quiet. He opened his box first, revealing a simple platinum band. I watched the light catch each facet as he handed it to me without a word. My fingers trembled as I slid the ring onto his left hand. It fit perfectly, my first gift to him. Then I revealed my own ring, a narrow band of white gold, set with a single small diamond. He accepted it with a slight nod, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Our hands met as we joined in the final moment of the ritual. Ring to ring, finger to finger. Still no words. The guitarist's song ended, and the guests cheered lightly, expecting applause from the newlyweds. Someone tapped Ethan's shoulder with a glass raised. He offered a stiff, perfunctory smile, and I forced one of my own. We sat, awkwardly, herded toward the table by a family friend who insisted we enjoy the first course. I picked at a salad of arugula and roasted beets, pushing a few leaves around with my fork. Ethan took polite bites of lobster ravioli, barely tasting it, his gaze fixed on the flickering lanterns overhead. The ambient glow should have felt romantic, but it only underscored the silence between us. I stole a glance at him, tracing the sharp line of his jaw in the warm light. This was my husband, my contract partner for the next 5 years. The weight of that reality settled in my chest like a rock. I found myself wondering, almost desperately, are we even in love? The question hovered between us, heavier than any bouquet or brass lantern. He raised his glass of champagne and offered a silent toast, his eyes on mine, but his expression unreadable. I lifted my glass in return. We clinked. And in that single chime, something shifted, however subtly. Behind his carefully composed face, I thought I glimpsed hesitation, regret, perhaps even a flicker of hope. As the guests drifted away to the dance floor and the guitarist changed songs, I remained seated, finger brushing the cool metal of my wedding band. The lilies on the table lay half opened, their petals trembling like mine. In that hush, I realized that this marriage arranged, transactional, devoid of emotion, was only the beginning of our story. 3 years lay ahead. 3 years of quiet mornings, empty dinners, and unspoken questions. But first, I needed to decide whether I would remain invisible in my own life, or whether I would fight to be seen. And so our silent wedding night closed, not with music or laughter, but with the soft promise of a question that neither of us yet had the courage to answer aloud. Every morning, my alarm buzzes at 6:30 a.m., sharp, the same tone I chose when I set up my phone years ago, convinced it would help me seize the day. Instead, each ring feels like an invitation to another round of my quiet, invisible life. I slip out of bed, the hardwood floor cold beneath my feet, and shuffle into the kitchenette. I measure coffee grounds with ritual precision, then toast 2 slices of whole grain bread. As the toaster pops, I crack 2 eggs into a non-stick pan, watching the whites set and the yolks bloom like miniature suns. I plate my breakfast on a chipped ceramic dish, no one else ever uses it, and carry it back to the balcony. I sip my coffee in silence, overlooking the city's waking sprawl. The cable cars clang, delivery vans lumber through the streets, joggers trace the bay's edge. I imagine I could be anyone out there, a novelist scribbling opening lines, a lawyer racing to court, a tourist marveling at the view. Instead, I'm Lily Parker, Chief Experience Officer of Helix Health AI, a title that gleams on our website but feels hollow in practice. By 7:30 a.m., I'm dressed in business casual tailored blouse, pencil skirt, and I step into the corridor that leads to Ethan's office. My office is a small room on the 12th floor, furnished with a glass desk, an ergonomic chair, and a single window overlooking the brick buildings below. The receptionist greets me with a perfunctory nod, but never asks how I'm doing. I tap my badge against the reader, and the door clicks open. Inside, I fire up my laptop, skimming overnight emails. There's the weekly update from marketing, a draft of my talking points for a product launch, and always notes from Ethan's assistant. Please confirm Mr. Cole's availability for media interviews. I draft my responses with care, making sure every sentence is polished, knowing he will never read beyond the first paragraph. By 9:00 a.m., I'm on a video conference call with the user research team. We review metrics from the beta test, engagement rates, stress level measurements, drop-off points. I present my revised interface prototypes, soft pastel accents, simplified menus, intuitive swipe gestures. The engineers scribble notes, but their eyes flick to the corner of the screen, waiting for the CEO's camera feed to appear. When Ethan finally joins at 9:15, he offers a fleeting nod and asks 2 pointed questions about data accuracy. The rest of my design rationale goes unacknowledged. Once the call ends, I send a follow-up email recapping my suggestions and schedule another meeting, just in case. Lunch is a solitary affair. I usually pick up a salad from the cafe across the street. Mixed greens, roasted beets, a sprinkling of goat cheese. I eat at my desk, headphones in, half listening to a podcast about UX trends. Between bites, my phone buzzes with notifications. LinkedIn endorsements, reminders of upcoming board events, and sometimes an unread message from Ethan. He rarely texts, but when he does, it's to confirm dates or logistics. "Is Mr. Cole available?" the reception desk asks every afternoon. I reply, "Yes, he's in a meeting until 3. And that's it. My own calendar contains dozens of entries marked Ethan Cole, TBD. The afternoon drags on with more slide decks, more silent exchanges, more cursor hovers. By 6:00 p.m., I pack up my laptop, wipe the crumbs from my desk, and leave. The lobby is emptying security guards at their posts, janitors pushing carts down the hall. I hail a rideshare and sink into the back seat, blinking against the glare of taillights and neon signs. I replay the day's interactions in my mind, the questions I wasn't asked, the ideas that went unheard, the small courtesy of a nod instead of a conversation. Back at the penthouse, I shuffle through groceries I've picked up earlier: baby spinach, turkey slices, a jar of peanut butter. I prepare a quick dinner turkey and avocado on whole grain bread, a handful of grapes, and carry my plate back to the balcony. I curl my legs beneath me and stare out at the city lights, each window a story I'll never know. I check my phone one last time. There it is, Ethan Cole. "Tomorrow night, you and I on stage at Y Health Asia. Be ready at 6. My heart tightens with equal parts dread and anticipation. I stare at the message until the screen blurs and whisper to the night, "Maybe tomorrow I'll finally be seen." That evening, just as I was clearing my plate on the balcony, my phone buzzed again. Heat from the day still clung to the glass floor beneath my feet, though the city lights had taken over the skyline. I unlocked the screen and saw a new message from Ethan. Ethan Cole. "Dress in your finest attire. Tomorrow night at 6:00, you and I will present at the Y Health Asia Gala. Be ready." I stared at those words for a long moment, the white text glowing against Ethan's crisp black font. My thumb hovered over the reply field. I wanted to type something edgy, "Glad I'm finally useful," but I knew better. Instead, I carefully crafted my response. "Me. Understood. I'll meet you in the lobby at 5:30. Sent." Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and allowed myself a heavy exhale. Why now? I closed my eyes and tried to summon a memory of when I last wore anything more glamorous than my standard business casual. Weeks ago, I found a deep emerald sheath dress hanging in my closet. A rescue from my roommate's wardrobe sale, a garment I'd never dared wear. Each time I passed it on the velvet hanger, I imagined some future moment when I could justify its shimmer. But that moment never came. Not for board meetings, not for user research presentations, not even for last year's company holiday party. Yet here I was, being asked, no, required to stand beside him under the brightest lights of the industry gala. My chest tightened as I thought of the massive hall, the stage framed by sleek LED screens, the hush that would fall before our names scrolled across the teleprompter. I pictured rows of investors in tailored tuxedos, socialites in glittering gowns, all leaning forward at the mention of Helix Health AI. And Mimi, the designer who spent her days behind a monitor, whose most visible accomplishment had been a footnote in the press release, was suddenly the show's co-star. I let my hand drift to my throat, touching the silver pendant Ethan gave me a year ago. A small, abstract shape, he said it represented connectivity. I'd never asked what it connected, nor had he asked what I saw in it. I slipped it off and held it between my fingers, weighing the cool metal. How many times had I questioned my place here? How many nights had I crawled into bed, unsure if I still belonged in this life? Each rejection email I sent out after losing my apartment had felt like another door slamming shut. All those long nights spent polishing my portfolio, resurrecting my prototypes only to have them vanish into Ethan's silent drafts folder. I paced across the balcony, the city breeze tugging at my hair. I wondered, is this gala different? Or is it just another performance for Ethan's sake? A knot of resentment tangled with a flicker of hope. Maybe, finally, I would claim my moment. Perhaps my voice would echo off those walls. Maybe an investor would catch my eye and ask me, directly, what inspired this design? Maybe I would stand there, not as a prop, but as the creator, the innovator, the woman behind the interface. I imagined the pre-gala ritual, slipping into that emerald dress, its fabric hugging my curves, pairing it with black heels that clicked purposefully on polished marble floors. I saw my reflection in the bedroom mirror, hair swept to one side, lips painted a soft rose. I pictured the hush that would greet me when I walked into that grand foyer, the admiration that would flicker across strangers' faces. For a heartbeat, I tasted the thrill of being seen. Then the memory struck me. The last time Ethan asked me to show up, it was at a small press Q&A where he introduced me as our design expert, then immediately fielded the first question himself. I sat there, microphone in hand, heart thudding, only to watch him speak over me, redirecting the conversation to metrics and timelines. My moment passed, swallowed by his authority. My fingers wrapped around the edge of the balcony railing, knuckles whitening. The city below pulsed with life, but up here I felt suspended, caught between the woman I was and the woman I wanted to become. If I stepped onto that stage tomorrow, would I end up as an afterthought again? Or could I finally transform this invitation into something real? I drew a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. I pressed the pendant back to my chest, as if hoping its quiet symbolism might steady me. I set my jaw, straightened my shoulders, and whispered to the empty sky, "Tomorrow they will see me." The anticipation crackled like static, sparking energy that replaced the resentment with determination. I closed my eyes and let the promise of that moment wash over me. "Dress in your finest," Ethan had written. And I would. But this time, I would ensure that the moment belonged to me just as much as it belonged to him. With that resolve, I went inside to prepare, imagining how those first seconds on stage might feel. My name announced, my voice clear, my presence undeniable. I pictured the start of a new chapter, not one dictated by a contract, but one defined by my own brilliance. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock, I would step into the spotlight. And this time, I would shine on my own terms. I stepped onto the stage at precisely 6 o'clock p.m., the applause washing over me like a wave that I wasn't sure I deserved. The Grand Bay Convention Center's main hall stretched out before me, rows of sleek white chairs filled with investors, healthcare leaders, and reporters. Above, a canopy of programmable LEDs glowed in shifting hues of teal and violet. Giant screens flanked either side of the platform, ready to project our slides in crisp 4K resolution. The scent of polished wood and fresh flowers mixed with the faint tang of industrial AC. My heart pounded so fiercely I thought it might echo around the room. I paused at the microphone, throat tight, feeling the heat of the spotlight carve me out from the dim audience. In the silence, I tasted every fragment of doubt I had nursed for 3 years, the mornings alone on the balcony, the lunches eaten quietly at my desk, the countless strategies drafted and never acknowledged. And yet here I was, center stage, under the brightest lights, the master of ceremonies, a poised woman in a charcoal gray pantsuit stepped forward. Her voice rippled through the room, warm but authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lily Parker," she announced, gesturing to me with a graceful sweep of her arm. As Chief Experience Officer of Helix Health AI, it was Lily's interface design that helped PulseMind secure its pivotal Series A funding last year. Under her guidance, user retention soared by 40%, proving that human-centered design can transform digital healthcare. I felt the weight of her words settle in my chest. The mention of PulseMind reminded me of that first hackathon we won. But this was bigger. This was public, monumental. My gaze skimmed the audience, men and women in tailored suits, iPads aloft, eager for insights that could shape multi-billion-dollar portfolios. I inhaled, exhaling the self-doubt I'd carried for too long. As the MC stepped back, I tapped the clicker in my hand. The first slide glowed to life behind me, an elegant dashboard displaying user mood scores over 30 days. I began. "Good evening. 3 years ago, I designed an experimental interface to help users track emotional well-being through subtle visual cues and adaptive feedback. Tonight, I'm honored to share how that concept evolved into a platform that actually changes lives." My voice rang clear, steady, far steadier than I felt. I navigated through graphs, live demos, and user testimonials. I spoke of midnight prototype sprints, of beta testers who emailed me at 2 a.m. to say our calming color transitions had helped them sleep. I described how the interface's gentle nudges reduced stress spikes by 25% in clinical trials. Each statistic I shared was a victory carved out of late nights and quiet perseverance. Partway through, I glimpsed Ethan across the stage wings. He stood rigid, arms folded, his usual composed mask giving way to something raw astonishment. His brows rose as he watched me command the space, translate data into human stories, and own every syllable. I caught the reflection of his gaze in the glossy lectern, the precise calculations in his eyes replaced by an unmistakable spark of pride and surprise. When I concluded, the room broke into genuine applause. The MC returned, smiling broader than before. "Thank you, Ms. Parker. That demonstration exemplifies the power of design-driven innovation in healthcare." I acknowledged the crowd with a slight bow, heart racing, feeling more alive than in any contract signing or silent ceremony I'd endured. Backstage, the bright lights faded, and I felt the familiar chill of the hallway air. I slid off the microphone clip, pulse still humming. I had shown them. I had shown him exactly who I was and what I could achieve. As I stepped away from the stage, a part of me whispered that nothing could be the same again. I stepped off the stage and into the narrow corridor behind the curtains, my heart still drumming to the echo of applause. The muted hum of voices on the other side of the fabric felt distant now, replaced by the quickening beat in my chest. I unclipped my microphone pack, every movement charged with the thrill of having finally spoken and been heard. That's when I saw him. Ethan stood a few paces away, framed by a doorway where the soft glow of backstage lighting met the deep indigo of the main hall. His posture was rigid, shoulders squared, but his eyes betrayed him. They were wide, unguarded, fixed on me with an intensity I'd never encountered before. In that instant, I felt his gaze like a spotlight aimed directly at my soul. I caught the faint quickening of his pulse at his neck, the subtle rise of his collar as he inhaled. His dark eyes, usually so composed, flickered with surprise, and something else, something raw and almost vulnerable. My breath caught. Did he see me? All the years that had felt like I was floating in his shadow rushed back. Every idea I'd pitched that got swallowed by meeting agendas, every introduction where his name came first and mine faded into silence, every time I sat in that empty cubicle wondering if my work mattered. And here, under these lights, he was seeing me for the first time as the person behind the title. Not the placeholder on his website, not the prop he paraded at investor dinners, but the very woman who had poured her creativity and passion into PulseMind's success. His gaze held mine, searching. There was a flicker of admiration, quickly masked by a tightening at the corner of his mouth, as if he was swallowing emotions he hadn't expected to feel. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the realization that this was more than the designer he'd hired, more than the image he'd needed. This was someone indispensable. I closed the distance between us, drawn by the pull of that unspoken acknowledgement. The hallway smelled of stage makeup and electronics, an odd, heady mix. I steadied my voice into a quiet question. "Ethan?" He blinked, yanked from whatever reverie had seized him. He ran a hand through his hair, fingers catching on the silvery streaks at his temple. The motion was uncharacteristically nervous, and I felt something shift in the air between us. "Lily," he said, his voice low and rough around the edges. "That was incredible." A warmth spread through my chest at the sincerity in his tone. For the first time, he wasn't offering a perfunctory nod or a polite compliment. He was speaking to me, the real me, stripped of spreadsheets and PR scripts. Was this the same man who had slid a prenup across a boardroom table without a single glance at my eyes? The same man who'd treated our partnership like a corporate merger rather than a marriage of equals? I studied his face, searching for doubt, for the glimmer of the financial strategist he usually was. Instead, I found wonder. He looked at me as though he'd discovered something he'd overlooked for years. He took a cautious step forward, closing some of the distance I'd just bridged. The corridor's walls pressed in. The glow of the exit sign pulsed like a heartbeat. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he murmured. "Just how much you did." I blinked, caught off guard by the quiver in his voice. "I tried," I said softly. "I tried every day." He shook his head, as if he was shaking off a lingering stupor. "No," he said, voice firmer now. "You let me go on thinking you were, I don't know, just a title. I never stopped to listen." His admission hit me like a gust of wind. 3 years of silence, of pretending our marriage was only a checkbox suddenly. It felt like a lie he'd lived and I'd tolerated. I swallowed, searching for words that could bridge the chasm of neglect between us. But before I could speak, he reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed my cheek, warm and alive. In that touch, I felt his regret, his longing, and perhaps his fear that he'd squandered something precious. My own walls trembled, and I realized how deeply I'd craved this recognition, even if it came late. He stepped back, as though frightened by the intensity between us. "We need to talk," he said, voice quiet but resolute. My heart fluttered. Talk. Not emails, not scheduled PR rehearsals, but a real conversation, one face to face, without agendas or deadlines. I nodded, searching his eyes for truth. "Yes," I said, "we do." As he walked away to prepare for the post-gala reception, I stood alone in that narrow corridor, still pulsing with the electricity of his gaze. The soft echo of distant music drifted through the walls, the applause of fading memory. That evening I knew a conversation was inevitable, one that would rip our silent years wide open, force us to reckon with every unspoken word. And I was ready. I unlocked the door to our penthouse and stepped inside, closing it behind me with a resolute click. The space felt cavernous in its minimalism, floor-to-ceiling windows draped in sheer white curtains, a single low-slung sectional sofa facing an ultra-thin OLED screen mounted on the wall, and a sculptural glass coffee table that reflected the city lights like scattered stars. The only other piece of furniture was a concrete-topped console holding a small vase of orchids, expensive but cold in its perfection. I walked straight to the coffee table, my heels echoing on the polished concrete floor. In my hand was the contract Ethan and I had signed 3 years ago, the one I'd almost forgotten amid late nights of coding and design sprints. I dropped the folder onto the table, the papers fanning out with a harsh whisper. He appeared from the kitchen alcove, where he'd been making calls, his phone still clutched in one hand. He took in the scene, me standing rigid, contract in hand, the orchids trembling in the draft from the sliding door he'd left ajar. His tie was loosened, top button undone, and his brow furrowed with concern.
"Lily?"
he said, stepping forward. "What's wrong?" "Wrong?" I repeated, voice trembling with anger and something deeper, a sorrow I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. I picked up the top page, waving it between us. "Tell me, Ethan, what did you think I was when you made me sign this?" He stared at the papers, then at my face.
"You agreed to the terms," he said quietly. "I thought I was helping both of us."
"Helping?" I laughed, bitter and hollow. "I signed my life away so I could pay rent and you could keep your image as the brilliant CEO. I slammed the contract onto the glass surface. "You think forgiveness of my debt equals gratitude? You think listing my title on the website means respect?" He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling.
"Lily,
No," I cut in, voice rising. "Don't Lily, me. You never once asked who I was or what I wanted beyond the role you assigned me. You never asked me how I felt. I've been invisible for 3 years." He winced as if struck. "I'm sorry," he said softly, stepping forward. "I didn't see how sidelined you felt." I shook my head. "Sorry isn't enough. Sorry doesn't undo every lunch I ate alone, every presentation you overshadowed, every time I sat in that office waiting for a single question about my work." I advanced on him, anger giving me courage. "What do you think I am to you?" He looked at me, eyes flickering between guilt and regret. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally he whispered, "You're my wife." I laughed, a sharp, pained sound. "On paper, yes, but what about in practice? What did you see when you looked at me?" His shoulders sagged. He placed his phone on the console, folded his hands. "I saw a title, a marketing asset, someone to fill the stage at investor dinners. I never stopped to appreciate you as a person." His confession hit me like a blow. Pain and anger tangled inside me, making it hard to think. I gripped the edge of the coffee table, knuckles white. "So prove it," I said, voice low but fierce. "Show me you actually see me. Show me I matter." He took a hesitant step forward. "I don't know how," he admitted, eyes downcast. "But I want to try." The room felt impossibly still. Only the faint hum of the city below drifted through the windows. My chest heaved as I searched his face for sincerity. I exhaled slowly, folding one arm across my stomach. Actions, I said, lifting my chin. Words are meaningless now. If you believe I matter, then prove it. He looked up, meeting my gaze. His dark eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw true vulnerability, an unguarded man realizing what he'd almost lost. I will, he said, voice certain. I promise. In that moment, I believed him enough to let my guard down, just a fraction. The contract lay forgotten on the table, a symbol of all that had gone wrong. His promise hung in the air, fragile but real. Rain spattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, each droplet casting ripples of silver light across the hardwood floor. I stood in the center of our bedroom, the gauzy semi-sheer curtains drawn shut, but glowing like embers in the soft lamplight. The air was warm and thick with anticipation, charged by the promise of an evening that would change everything. Ethan entered quietly, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He was dressed in dark slacks and a damp button-down shirt, collar undone. His hair was damp from the rain, strands clinging to his forehead, and the sharp lines of his jaw were softened by the low light. As he approached, I felt my pulse accelerate. Each footstep he took seemed to echo in my chest. He stopped a few feet away and watched me with that intensity I'd glimpsed backstage. I swallowed, smoothing my emerald dress against my legs. Its fabric was cool and sleek, the dress itself a rescue from months ago, stored away until tonight. I slipped a hand behind my back and unzipped the gown, letting the skirt pool around my feet like a luscious cloak. My shoulders were bare. I felt his breath catch. Ethan reached out, his fingers grazing the curve of my shoulder. The contact was electric, sending a shiver through my spine. He pulled me closer, so that the tips of our noses brushed. I inhaled his scent clean, a trace of rainwater mixed with his cologne. I let my arms circle his waist. He tilted his head and brushed his lips against my collarbone, then higher to my neck. His mouth was soft, deliberate, exploring the skin there with gentle pressure. My eyes fluttered closed as his hands slid beneath the thin fabric of my lingerie, cupping my hips. He paused, as if asking for permission, and I nodded, though he could feel my answer in the warmth that bloomed between us. He lifted me, guiding me backward onto the edge of the bed. I felt the plush duvet give way as I settled against it. He stood over me for a moment, giving me time to take in his height, the ripple of his muscles under his shirt, the way the candlelight reflected in his dark eyes. Then he bent to unbutton my blouse, each button undone with tender focus. The fabric fell away, and he kissed the skin of my upper chest, his lips moving in slow crescendos. I reached for his shirt, sliding my fingers under the collar to tug it open. He helped me peel it off, letting it drop to the floor along with my skirt, until we were both bare before each other. The room felt smaller, cloaked in the hush of rain and the soft glow of lamps. It was intimate and raw, as if the world outside contracts, board meetings, silent dinners, vanished in that warm circle of light. Ethan's hands traveled up my ribs, pulling me closer until his chest was flush against mine. We kissed then, full, urgent. His tongue traced my lips, seeking entrance, and I parted for him. The taste of him was familiar, yet new in its tenderness. I wound my arms around his neck, arching into him as he deepened the kiss. He lowered his forehead to mine, breathing hard. His eyes searched mine for reassurance, and I gave it without words, pressing my palms against his chest. Then he guided me down, so that we lay side by side on the bed. I felt the coolness of the sheets beneath us, and the thunder of my heart as he aligned himself with me. The first moment he entered me was slow and deliberate, a question asked in the softest whisper of movement. I drew in a breath, pressing closer as he began to move, first tentatively, then with increasing rhythm. The rain drummed steadily on the glass, matching the pulse in my veins. Each rise and fall brought us closer, his embrace unwavering. He reached down to hold my hand, our fingers entwined. I felt every inch of him, every breath he took, as our bodies synced in a dance as old as time. The world narrowed to the feel of his skin against mine, the heat between us, the sound of our breath mingling. In that moment, I knew this was nothing like the sterile contract we'd signed, nothing like the role I'd been forced to play. This was real. When he stilled, both of us panting, he rolled onto his side and captured my gaze. His hair fell in damp strands across his forehead, and his eyes shone with emotion. He brushed my cheek with the back of his hand and leaned in to kiss me gently.
"You're worth so much more than this,"
he whispered, voice thick with feeling. His words settled around me like a promise, echoing through the hush of the rain and the flicker of the candles. In that quiet, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I slept little after our first night together. In the early hours, I woke to the steady patter of rain and Ethan's breathing beside me. I traced the curve of his shoulder, memorizing the warmth and softness that had eluded me for so long. But before dawn could offer comfort, I remembered the contract still tucked into my bag. I slipped out of bed quietly and padded to the console where I'd left it. The soft glow of my phone's flashlight showed the folder's crisp cover. I hesitated, heart pounding, fingers trembling as I pried it open. The pages fell like fallen leaves, precise, unreadable, except for one brutal line that stabbed through the paper. Section 7.2. Dissolution Penalty. In the event of dissolution of the marriage within 5 years of the effective date, wife shall refund all debt forgiveness sums and disbursements previously received, up to 100,000 United States dollars, $100,000. My breath hitched. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the contract to my chest as though it could shield me from the betrayal I felt. $100,000. A penalty so punitive it felt like a cage disguised as a lifeline. They'd forgiven my student loans, nearly $70,000, and given me a stipend for living expenses. But if I left, they would demand every cent back, plus a punitive fee. I slid my fingers across the inked words, willing them to blur. The rain's rhythm outside matched the frantic beat in my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, but the walls seemed to close in. My mind raced back through the last 3 years, the empty dinners, the silent mornings, the countless presentations where I stood as a prop, and now this, a clause ensuring that if I ever dared to reclaim my life, I would be financially crushed. A wave of anger washed over me, hot and sharp. My throat tightened as tears pricked my eyes, not of sorrow, but of indignation. How could I have missed this? I'd signed with a mind focused on survival, trusting that forgiveness meant freedom. Instead, I was shackled by a threat worse than any debt collector. I gathered my courage, standing and carrying the contract into the living area. The rain-lit cityscape greeted me through the windows, indifferent to my turmoil. I folded the papers with trembling hands, as though folding away the last shred of trust I'd placed in Ethan. He emerged from the bedroom doorway, concern etched on his face. The sight of me clutching that folder triggered guilt in his eyes, but I barely registered it. "Lily?" he asked, voice hushed as if afraid to break the fragile silence. I held the contract up between us, the pages trembling. "Do you see this?" I bit out the words, my voice raw. "If I walk away, if I choose myself over this arrangement, I owe you $100,000, plus everything you forgave." He stepped forward, arms opening in an offer of comfort. I recoiled, stepping back so that the contract kept him at bay. "Don't," I said sternly. "Not yet." He frowned. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it was worded that harshly." I laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "You did know. Your lawyers did. You both buried the clause in legalese so I wouldn't notice." The tears spilled down my cheeks, but I refused to drop the contract. "You think you're so clever. Help me with my debt," you said. But it was a trap. His face blanched. He reached out, but I swatted his hand away. "Ethan, listen. I gave you my design talent, my ambition, 3 years of my life, and now I'm trapped by your fine print. It's not love. It's not partnership. It's profiteering." He opened his mouth, closed it, then spoke softly. "You're right. I was short-sighted." "Short-sighted?" I echoed, voice trembling with righteous fury. "No. I think you were calculating." I slammed the contract onto the coffee table. The glass surface rattled. "Remove it," I demanded, voice firm. "Strip that clause. Wipe it out entirely." I sank into the sectional sofa, clutching the contract like a lifeline. He knelt in front of me, eyes earnest. "I will. I promise. But that takes time, legal procedures, shareholder approvals." I cut him off, voice rising. "Time? You have the power to do it now. You can call your lawyer, tear up these pages, and draft an amendment, or I can walk out that door, and they'll come after me for 6 figures. So decide. Either you remove the penalty, or I leave for good." I rose, voice steady, each word piercing the still air. "No more silent compromises. No more illusions of partnership. I want freedom, or I want justice. You choose." He looked up at me, conflicted, regret and determination warring in his gaze. The thunder rolled outside, an echo of my own pulse. "We'll fix this," he began, voice low. I met his eyes, searching for sincerity. "Fix it by midnight," I said, "or I'm gone." He nodded, a tense promise. I handed him the contract, watching the pages tremble between us. Lightning flashed beyond the windows, illuminating the room in stark white. And in that flash, I understood that the next move would determine everything, whether our marriage became a genuine partnership or whether it disintegrated under the weight of betrayal. I sat on the edge of the sofa, contract folder open on my lap, the rain still trickling down the windows behind me. Ethan slipped out of the living room and into the kitchen alcove. I heard his low voice over the lip of the console table. "Get me Jacobs and Myers. It's urgent." My heart thudded as I listened to him give terse instructions. "Remove Clause 7.2. Draft an amendment for equal equity. Deliver the paperwork by midnight." His voice was calm, determined nothing, like the hesitant man who'd first hesitated over my challenge. Moments later, he re-entered, trailing a leather briefcase. He closed the distance between us, sliding the bag onto the coffee table. From it, he withdrew a crisp white envelope stamped with our corporate seal and the firm's name. "I asked them to prepare a new agreement," he said, voice low. He unsealed the envelope and withdrew 2 pages, one to void the penalty clause, the other to establish our equal partnership. I watched as he placed the voided page atop the original contract. His fingers curled around the edge of Section 7.2, and with deliberate slowness, he tore the paper in 2. The rip echoed in the quiet room, and the torn halves fell like wounded wings onto the glass tabletop. I stared at him, tears pricking my eyes, as he gathered the fragments into one hand. Then he set them aside, almost reverently, and picked up the new amendment. He tapped his pen twice, then slid the document toward me. "This revises Section 4.2 and replaces Section 7.2 entirely," he said. "You'll have full equity 10% vested immediately and no penalty if the marriage dissolves." My fingers shook as I moved the pages closer. The amendment spelled out in clear terms: "Both parties shall hold equal equity rights regarding corporate shares granted under this agreement. No clause regarding dissolution penalty shall apply." I looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were soft but resolute, the same eyes that had first frightened me with their indifference, now steady with purpose. "Sign here," he said, sliding the pen across the page. I took a steadying breath and reached for the pen. The metal felt heavy in my hand, yet warm with possibility. I touched my initials to the first line, then my full name at the bottom. With each stroke, I felt the weight of 3 years lifting. He signed the counterpart beneath mine, the sound of ink scratching across the document like a promise being reborn. When he finished, he set the pen down and leaned forward, pressing his palms against mine. "It's done," he whispered. "Your equal partner. I'm sorry for keeping you in the dark." I closed my eyes against the rush of relief and gratitude. When I opened them again, I saw him gather the torn penalty clause pages in his other hand, crumpling them and tossing them into the fireplace hearth by the window. The flames flickered to life, consuming the fragments until they were nothing but ash drifting upward. I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his. "Thank you," I said, voice thick with emotion, "for seeing me, for this." He drew me into a hug, one arm wrapping around my waist, the other holding my hand tight. I felt the solid reassurance of his embrace, the real partnership I'd yearned for, finally here. Later, when the final paperwork was couriered off to Jacobs and Myers, Ethan and I stood side by side in the penthouse kitchen, sharing a fragile smile. Outside, the rain had ceased, and the city lights below glittered like a promise. That night, for the first time in years, I fell asleep in his arms, without the shadow of debt or penalty hanging over me. And then I woke up next to him, with a new chapter just beginning. Bin min roi qua tam rem, mình sang bạc nhảy múa trên bàn bếp. Tôi bấm nút pha cà phê, nghe tiếng máy xay cà phê sét lên đều đặn như nhịp tim an lành. Ethan bước vào, chào tôi bằng nụ cười ấm áp lần đầu tiên tôi được thấy ngay sau khi thức dậy. He set 2 mugs on the counter. The steam rose in lazy spirals. "Dark roast?" he asked, handing me a mug. I nodded, cupping the warm ceramic in both hands. "Just the way I like it." We settled at the small marble-top table where, months ago, we'd only shared silence. Now our knees brushed under the tabletop, and I felt a comfort I'd never known. Ethan poured milk into his coffee, then looked up at me with genuine interest. "How did the beta test go?" I smiled, surprised by the ease of the question. In the past, he would have asked for a written summary. Now, He wanted my perspective. "Great," I said. Users responded well to the new color palette, an 18% increase in engagement, and the breathing prompt feature reduced stress spikes by another 10%. He leaned forward, fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "That's impressive. Let's highlight those numbers in the board presentation and ask the design team to refine the animations. Make them a bit smoother." I blinked. He was actually asking for my input on design, not just scheduling dates. "Absolutely," I replied, excitement bubbling in my chest. "I'll bring mock-ups by noon." He nodded, eyes bright. "Perfect." Later that morning, I walked him to the elevator, and he paused to press the button. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you've done these past few days." I hesitated, then met his gaze. "Thank you for listening." His lips curved into a soft smile. "It means the world." At work, the shift was palpable. Instead of forwarding my emails without reading, he CC'd me on strategic updates, explicitly inviting my commentary. I found myself drafting responses that he genuinely considered my suggestions received likes in the group chat, and engineers even thanked me for clarifying icon behaviors. I realized I'd spent 3 years wondering if my voice mattered. Now, it carried weight. During lunch, we shared a quiet corner at our favorite cafe. He ordered my usual turkey avocado sandwich on sourdough, and I watched him pay before sliding the food across to me. In the past, I would have returned the favor and paid for him. "Now," he insisted. "You've earned it," he said, eyes twinkling. I laughed, warmth pooling in my chest. Point taken. Over sandwiches and a shared iced tea, we talked about our weekends, my plans to meet an old friend at the art museum, his upcoming charity run for pediatric health. It was the first truly personal conversation we'd had. No contracts, no performance metrics, just 2 people connecting. Back home that evening, Ethan surprised me with a record player he'd found at a vintage shop downtown. He placed a vinyl of Norah Jones's "Come Away With Me" on the turntable. Soft jazz filled the apartment. He offered his hand. "Dance with me?" I hesitated, then slipped my hand into his. In the living room, we moved slowly, her song wrapping around us. I felt his hand gently guide my waist, and I rested my head on his shoulder. For the first time, I let myself be held without apprehension. He whispered, "You deserve to be cherished." My throat tightened. 3 years of feeling unworthy, invisible, now melted away in his embrace. I stepped back, searching his face. "I never knew." I didn't expect." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I'm sorry it took me so long, but every day now, I want to show you." A flutter of happiness rose in me, fragile but real. I thinly spread my arms around his neck and whispered, "I feel it." That night, as I brushed my teeth, I caught my reflection. Bright eyes, a soft smile, a woman awakened. I realized that in Ethan's gentle changes listening, valuing my time, inviting me into decisions, I was being loved in ways I'd only dreamed of. And in that quiet moment, I thought, I am being cherished. That evening, after a long day of sharing laughter and hopeful glances, I found myself retreating to the quiet sanctuary of our bathroom. The soft overhead light cast a warm glow over the tiled floor, but even that felt too bright for my mood. My heart beat a steady drum of nerves as I locked the door behind me and settled onto the closed toilet lid, cradling a small white plastic stick in my trembling hand. I'd bought it on a whim during a grocery run 3 tests in one pack, never expecting to use them. But my cycle was late, unnaturally late, and a low ache of anxiety had taken resident in my lower abdomen for days. Ethan had kissed away my worries this morning, but now, alone, I felt that old knot of fear tighten. What if everything I'd started to build with him was about to shift in ways we couldn't control? With careful fingers, I removed the cap and dipped the absorbent tip into a cup of my morning sample. The minutes stretched long and thin. I set the test stick on the edge of the sink, leaning my head against the cool porcelain countertop. My reflection in the mirror looked back at me. Eyes wide, pale lips parted in silent anticipation. I closed my eyes and tried to calm my breath, but my heart galloped like wild horses in a meadow. 2 minutes ticked by. 3. Each second felt like an hour. I stared at the test, willing it to show the result I dared to imagine. Then, as if awakened by my gaze, 2 pink lines appeared side by side. Bold, unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my palm against the wall to steady myself, my knees buckling beneath me. 2 lines meant positive. I was pregnant. My mind reeled through a kaleidoscope of thoughts. Joy filled me first, warm and bright, like the sunrise we'd watched together on our balcony just days ago. Then came a surge of fear. A new life growing inside me meant responsibilities I hadn't anticipated. Would Ethan be happy? Scared? Would this bind us closer, or drive a wedge between the new, equal partnership we were only beginning to cherish? I traced my fingertip over the 2 lines, as though touching them might solidify the reality. This wasn't a prototype or a user test. This was my life, changing forever. The bathroom tile felt cold beneath my palms, grounding me in this moment of revelation. The soft echo of the faucet dripping seemed unusually loud. The world outside paused just for me. My mind flicked back to our first night of passion, his whispered words, "You're worth so much more than this." Now, more than ever, I understood their depth. I'd thought he saw me then, but seeing a child growing inside me would lift that understanding to another plane entirely. Fear and hope wove together in my chest. I couldn't ignore the practicalities. Our careers, our newfound equity partnership, the delicate balance of time and ambition. Yet nothing mattered more than the tiny heartbeat that had begun somewhere deep within me. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, letting the tension ebb from my shoulders. I lifted the test in both hands, studying those 2 lines one last time. In their stark simplicity lay a universe of possibilities. My phone buzzed through the door. Ethan's text asking how late I'd be. I slipped the test into my pocket, smoothing my blouse and taking a steadying sip of the cool water from the sink faucet. My reflection now bore a quiet resolve. Stepping out of the bathroom, I unlocked the door softly and returned to the living room where Ethan was reading on the sofa. He looked up, concern flickering in his eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting the book aside. I hesitated, my voice caught in my throat. I crossed the room and stood before him. The test stick felt heavy in my hand, an anchor of truth I could no longer keep hidden. "I have something to tell you," I said, heart pounding. He rose and reached for me, but I held up my hand, gently but firmly. "I'm pregnant," I whispered, and let the words hang between us. His eyes widened, hope and astonishment mingling in his gaze as he took a breath to respond. But I knew, in that suspended moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. The garden behind our penthouse was a modest patch of green on the rooftop, a secret oasis suspended above the city's hum. Tonight, it felt like a world apart. Delicate strands of fairy lights wove through the wrought iron trellis, casting a soft golden glow over clusters of vermilion hummingbird flowers whose petals nodded gently in the night breeze. A lantern flickered on a small stone pedestal, its flame dancing across the trimmed boxwood hedges. The air smelled of damp earth and sweet nectar, as if the garden itself celebrated the moment. I stood beside Ethan at a simple wooden arch draped in gauzy white fabric. He held a single folded sheet of paper, the vows we'd written together just hours ago. My own paper trembled slightly in my hand. There were no clauses, no legalese, no mention of stocks or debt forgiveness. Just 2 sentences each, the promises we had chosen for ourselves. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air brush my bare shoulders. The soft click of glass sandals on stone marked Ethan's arrival at my side. He wore a dark linen shirt, rolled at the sleeves, and I had chosen a knee-length ivory dress, nothing extravagant, just enough to feel special. He looked at me with that same intensity that had first startled me backstage, and I felt the familiar flutter in my chest. He unfolded his paper and met my gaze. "Lily," he began, voice low but steady, "I promise to cherish your heart, to honor your dreams, and to stand by your side as your partner in life and in love." My breath caught. His words had an authenticity that no contract had ever held. I watched as his eyes glistened in the lantern light eyes that no longer saw me as an asset, but as the woman he adored. When he finished, he reached for my hand, his fingers curled around mine, warm and reassuring. "Say the words back to me," he whispered. I unfolded my sheet, seeing the neat loops of my own handwriting. "I vow to love you without reservation, to support you without condition, and to face every tomorrow with you, hand in hand." I looked up, voice catching with emotion. "I love you," I said, "and I do." He drew me closer, pressing his lips to mine in a soft, lingering kiss, the first time in 3 years that our union felt born of genuine love rather than obligation. The world seemed to hold its breath around us. The hummingbird flowers paused in their nodding, the lantern flame steadied, and the city lights below dimmed in reverence. When we parted, he tucked my hair behind my ear and rested his forehead against mine. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that," he murmured. Tears pricked my eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it felt like light bursting through me. "Nor I," I replied, voice soft. "But I'm here now." We stepped back under the arch, hands still entwined. A light rain began to fall, misty and gentle, each droplet catching the lantern glow like diamonds. Ethan slipped a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple ring, a slender band of rose gold engraved on the inside with our wedding date and the words, "Together at last." My heart swelled. It wasn't a grand gesture, no 3-carat diamond, no elaborate ceremony, but it was perfect. It was ours. He slid the ring onto my finger, then pulled me close for another kiss, firmer this time, sealing our vows with a promise etched into my skin. We stood there for several beats, wrapped in each other's arms and in the soft embrace of the rooftop garden. When we finally stepped away, Ethan brushed rain from my cheek and offered his arm.
"Shall we go inside?"
he asked, a playful smile lighting his face. I nodded, leaning into him as we walked back through the lantern-lit path. The hummingbird flowers waved us goodbye, petals glistening with rain. As we entered the penthouse, I felt a sense of calm resolve. Our vows were simple, our promises heartfelt, and our future unwritten. The contract lay forgotten, replaced by a covenant born of trust and true affection. And so, under the open sky, with lanterns flickering and flowers swaying, we began the next chapter. Not as a business arrangement, but as two souls who had finally found each other in the light of genuine love. It's been 6 months since we renewed our vows under the hummingbird flowers. Now, we have a new chapter unfolding, one that began the moment I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. Every morning, I wake to the gentle press of Ethan's hand against my growing belly, a silent promise that we'll face this adventure together. The future feels both thrilling and daunting, but I no longer fear the unknown. Our penthouse is quieter these days. The minimalist living room has been softened by small touches: a wicker cradle in the corner, a stack of children's books by the sofa, and a wooden mobile hanging above the changing table, its carved hummingbirds dancing in the light. The city still hums beyond our windows, but inside, there's a calm anticipation that fills the rooms with warmth. Some evenings, Ethan and I wander up to the rooftop garden. The fairy lights remain strung among the trellis, and the vermilion flowers still nod in the breeze. He curls his arm around my shoulders as I stand beneath the glow, my hand resting over his. The necklace he gave me, once caught in contract, torn by betrayal, now sits whole around my neck. The tiny hummingbird pendant gleams against my skin, a testament to our journey from broken promises to true partnership. I often reach up and touch it, remembering the first time I held its cool metal in my fingers, uncertain what it represented. Now, it reminds me that even fragile things can be mended. I catch Ethan watching me, his eyes filled with a tenderness I never thought possible when we first signed that agreement. We exchange a soft smile, one that says, "We made it through the storm." Late at night, when the city lights blur into ribbons of color, Ethan and I sit on the balcony with mugs of chamomile tea. He'll ask me about our baby's first kick. "Did you feel that?" And I'll press my hand to my abdomen and nod, smiling at the spark of life beneath my palm. He rests his other hand over mine, and I trace his wedding ring with my thumb, marveling at its simple band of rose gold. It overlaps our hummingbird pendant, a symbol that both jewelry and love can bear the weight of time. Our careers have shifted too. I now lead Helix Health's product division with full creative control, my voice heard in every boardroom. Ethan champions my ideas as fiercely as his own. We collaborate late into the evenings. He writes code, I refine user flows, and celebrate each milestone as a team. Our lives are busier than ever, but there's harmony in the balance. We're partners in every sense now. Sometimes I close my eyes and remember the contract I signed, the penalty clause I discovered, the tears I shed when I thought I was nothing more than collateral. I'm grateful for those painful memories, for they led me to this place where love isn't measured in dollars or appearances, but in shared vulnerability and unwavering support. The necklace around my neck and the ring on my finger are more than adornments. They're emblems of resilience, proof that we can transform hardship into genuine connection. As I prepare for the arrival of our child, I reflect on the miles we've traveled from that first silent ceremony, through the confrontation, to this quiet, hopeful waiting. Tonight, I'll slip into bed beside Ethan, rest my head on his chest, and let his steady heartbeat lull me to sleep. Tomorrow, I'll wake to his whispered, "Good morning," reach for his hand, and feel the life we've built pressing gently between us. We can lose so much: dreams, security, certainty. But in the end, we can find each other again. And in that discovery, we become whole.